Excuse the quality of the video, the different location, the potential possible weird noises that the refrigerator makes. I'm not sure if you can hear those. If you can, I apologize in advance. And the cut on my face, I wanted to make this, but I'm traveling. Anyway, LPL Immersion, covering the rankings of the Chinese teams following the past 2 weeks of LPL and the Demacia Cup, so this is an extra week of time between. I figured it made more sense just to go off of the 2 weeks and keep the normal schedule. What I want to get into is immediately, bottom two teams haven't really changed. I still feel like King is the worst team, WE is the second worst team. You can go to the previous videos for how I feel about that. King has shown some more interesting obsessions with Yasuo. They still can't seem to 2-0. WE has shown, we've shown less, seen even less of them, but they're still fixated on these all-out play comps and they're not really getting anywhere. Number 10 actually has changed is Royal Never Give Up. Royal has fallen quite a little bit in my estimation. They still can't find this strategic element that they used to have when they were king in the off-season, and they've gone to complete disaster. They seem uncoordinated. All they do is try to fight you. They're just the typical Chinese team of 2 years ago, if what people would think of as the typical Chinese team, whether or not they were actually that at that time. This is what RNG is now. And they're not nice to look at. They do, however, have some elements of vision which are good, and they're able to find carry performances or a little bit more coordination than WE or levels of play than WE or King, so that's why they're in 10th. Now we have number 9 is going to be surprisingly Vici Gaming. If you haven't heard me rant about Vici Gaming yet on China Talk or what have you, you are in for a treat. I think Vici Gaming is a complete disaster. I was kind of being tentative before about Dandy moving to top. I said, maybe it's not such a terrible thing, you know? Maybe Dandy has like a very, very high mechanical aptitude. He's not as good of a top laner as Carry. He's just not. And he's probably not going to be as good of a top laner as Carry until the end of the season. Dandy, I think, has better decision-making, better understanding of the game, better idea of invading the jungle, placing wards, understanding vision, working with Mata than Carry did. But he didn't really understand the champions as well. He didn't understand how to 2v1 as well. He didn't understand matchups as well. So this is something that I think is showing more and more as the game progresses, and as people start to figure out Vici's gimmick sort of roam top style a little bit better. I also think World 6 showing less proficiency on champions other than Gragas, so he has shown that he can play Echo, so that's a little bit of a saving grace. And it's just 2 champions. His performance on other champions really hasn't done as much for me. I think still he's a pretty solid pickup in terms of an amateur jungle that they just found at solo queue. Of the new pickups, I think he actually still has the higher upside of Xiaoxi, ZCR, and himself, World 6. The teams have picked up, so I still think he's really solid, but he's not Dandy, so ultimately you have these 2 positions receiving a downgrade. There's less overall mobile synergy between jungle and support, so really you just have this team relying on Mata to have an amazing performance and carry them through. This only happens 50% of the time when maybe, I don't know, he received the cream in his coffee, he got the correct amount of sunlight, whatever Mata needs to be in a good mood and try to carry a game, and then even then, like, supports are very powerful right now, and they probably have the largest individual impact in terms of mechanical ability and warding right now, I think. There's only so much you can do if the rest of your team is a complete and utter disaster. So, Vici Gaming, I actually think, will lose their playoff seed overall. Because the surprise here is that I have 8th place as unlimited potential. This team, you might actually think, is very similar to Vici in terms of they have a support that's guiding them, but I think the overall upside of some of their carry players, the mechanical skill, the way they listen to Heart, and Heart's very commanding voice, Heart's consistency over Mata's is higher. I actually think right now Heart is the best support player in the world. He's very proficient on a bunch of different mechanical champions. His shot calling sounds very crisp in the different comm sections that they show between games on the Chinese stream. It seems like the team is listening to him and working as a cohesive unit. It's just those random misplays, those inability to execute these. Also, this team that has an idea is able to analyze and understand like the key problems of other teams and make compositions or make strategies against them right now. I feel like before that was IG, but this split it's UP. So that's working really well for them. And I think they'll still be 8th overall just because they are so immature, they also are so new. There isn't really this unifying factor, and if Heart isn't around, a lot of them literally just feed. But I think that they're overall better than the other 4 teams that I've just mentioned. So 7th place I have Master 3. I think Master 3 has been hugely inflated in the standings, and since the change of the bracket format, which I'll go over really quickly since I haven't, it's effectively a gauntlet with about, at 5th place it breaks into a bracket stage. So, 1st and 2nd seed are guaranteed at least 4th, there's like a 3rd place match, all these other things, but just think of it going up as a gauntlet. This means seed matters a whole lot more, it's really important. As a result, teams have stopped throwing. We're actually having a better overall quality of matches in the past week, I think. And Master 3 is just losing games. They faced OMG and Snake and just got destroyed by both teams. They faced OMG and LGD, and just got dumpstered by both teams. And I don't see them carrying through. I think Condi is still like the backbone, the thing that holds these teams together, but he's just not overall as strong as some of these more aggressive junglers like Loveling, even, who is, despite all of his inconsistency, definitely an invade and kill you type jungle, and he sort of had his way with the map in the set against Master 3. 6, which I have as Invictus Gaming. Now this might be surprising to a few people for me to have Invictus Gaming so low. I'm not sure why I had them a few weeks ago, but probably not this low. Invictus Gaming right now, I think they do really well when they have these Lulu mid compositions, like the Echo, the Yasuo, the dive compositions, but when they don't have those compositions, if you ban the Lulu, if you take that component away, sometimes if you take the Echo component away, and I think in a weird way their bottom lane is really dependent on having Janna. Like Kitties hasn't shown proficiency. This was a concern of mine last split as well, is that Kitties was very reliant on Janna and Thresh, but it's I think even become more extreme this split. And it's just not good. Like, Kid is the one player is just like, stop picking Sivir, just pick Vayne. I hate saying that, but just pick Vayne for Kid, honestly. They're not doing well as a unit. They're just very pick dependent. They seem to not care when they don't have... And when you think about it, Zatai looks like the most motivated player on their roster. If that's happening, something really, really terrible has gone wrong. So I see them at 6th place right now, which... I think they're about roughly that in the standings. It's a good place for them. 5th place, then, is OMG. They've risen a little bit since last I estimated them. I think part of that is they look really good with North. They look more like a team with North than they ever did at UZI. If you talk to the team, if you hear the statements, it's because UZI has hurt his hand. But I think... like, the difference in, and I made a video on this, the difference on a cool-centric team and a cool UCI-centric composition just causes them to clash a lot. And there are some personality issues, but I don't think they're as big as just the stylistic mismatch of having those two as your primary carries. And I think the team looks more like a unit overall if they can have North as a self-sufficient AD carry, and then Cool and Loveling doing their Cool and Loveling things around the map. Unfortunately, this is like sort of an inconsistent style, especially since Cool is a very stubborn guy, and he tends to pick champions he's bad at. He doesn't admit that he's bad at them, so like Azir and Lulu, I don't think he's very good at those champions, but he just keeps picking them. In Loveling and Cool, their synergy has been debilitating at times, just given how strong it is. It's weird. It's like if they don't get the ward in the right spot, Cool does this misplay. If Cool can't keep the pressure, then Loveling can't gank this lane at this time. It's really, really weird to watch, and I've watched them a lot, and I almost think that maybe it's time for them to try to be on separate teams. But I don't think that will ever happen. It'll just be someone riding the bench, if anything. I have them at 5 right now. They look good at parts, but again, Xiang, very pick reliant, just not going as he ever was. The way those three work together is not there. They don't have the synergy. The bottom lane is still an issue. UZI might come back, and they're just not. Their drafting is still really, really bad. So they're not as solid as the top 4 that we have. 4th place team, Snake. I have Snake as 4th place. Right now, they've fallen a little bit. I had them at 2nd. I just think that the fact that they can't play lane swaps is a huge issue. Like, their top laner falls behind. They're not as strong in that aspect. I think what they've done with their roster with CZR in the jungle, and then Martin and Ella is really interesting. It makes them a much more top-heavy unit, so that's really fun to watch. Just... the synergy of Flandra and Yu, like Flandra's leash has been let out. He can do all the crazy stuff, and then Yu can pick up the pieces at the end. And I think that works extremely well for them. ZZR, I'm still not sure how exactly he fits. He seems more aggressive early at times than Beast. with a little bit of a team fighting aspect. Beast, I think, was just really, really good at team fighting, even though he didn't have the early aggressive points, but ZZR is still a little bit inconsistent at that. ZZR, I think, will be really good at the carry junglers as they become more in vogue, like the Nidalee, if we see more Elise, that kind of thing. The Sadia Devourer type junglers, if they ever become in meta, more Runeglaive junglers. So I'm looking forward to seeing him on those, because I think his performances on Nidalee and Echo have been really solid. Top 3, Xiaogu is number 3. Now, when people talk about Xiaogu, they look like, people say they look at Snake in disguise. Their objective control is inconsistent, they go over aggressive too many times. I think, first of all, this meta is really good for them. The snowballing the jungle meta, and yes, Swift is extremely aggressive, but I think Doinby is really, really good. Like, I'm starting to get to this point where I consider a Doinby an elite mid laner, just because I think he fits the meta better than any mid laner in the world right now, just in terms of his specific style being tailored toward the mid. So, obviously Faker is the best mid laner because he can play anything, but in terms of Doinby understanding what the meta is and just, like, picking the right champions, like, even sometimes picking tanks, which is really weird, but I think it actually really works right now, especially against, like, Yasuo compositions, being very good at the supportive style, following the jungle around. That it's not necessarily like what you think of as a typical mid, but whatever it is, he's really, really good at it, so it's really interesting to watch. And I think in that regard, he covers up for a lot of those over-aggressive failings, because he's always there to kind of do the cleanup duty, and he does that extremely well. And again, the Janna, Echo stuff, so much engage, disengage, they might be a little bit reliant on that, and I would like to see a composition or a strategy that challenges that, maybe banning those champions, banning more disengaged champions, denying the Gragas, if you also ban Echo and Janna, these types of things. I'm not sure we'll see it, or if we do, we won't see it into the playoffs, but it'll be really, really interesting if it does come out. Xiaogu is actually really underrated when people say that. In terms of the dimensions that Xiaogu are showing in challenging their weaknesses, in trying to play more lane swaps, and trying to develop these more strategic elements, these are things we didn't see out of Snake. Snake just really stagnated, so I think calling them another Snake is really underselling them. And part of that is there is a lot of maturity on that roster. Snake had a lot of immature and very young players, a team that wasn't really ready to develop yet, but TNT, TCT, Swift, they've all been around for a long time, and even V has been on a bunch of other LSPL teams, and he's been in the scene for a while. So just saying that this team has, like, the immaturity of Snake and the unwilling to test things and develop is just unfair to them, and I think that each of these players have more dimensions and more willingness to test styles, and they've shown this, so I think that they're going to have a lot bigger upside, and they're one of my favorites to go to Worlds overall, and I do think they're legitimately the third best team in China right now. So unless the meta changes drastically and they can't figure it out, I think Xiaogu's going to Worlds. LGD. Now this one's really interesting. I'm really high on Xiaoxi. I don't think he's actually super good. He's about probably mid-tier LPL jungler. But he's gotten progressively better each time I've seen him. His Gragas play was really strong. His initiates. I was really worried about him on Gragas because they kept picking Rek'Sai and banning Gragas like he couldn't play it. Xiaoxi, by the way, is their new jungler. They finally have started replacing TBQ a little bit. This past week, they played 6 games. They lost the 3 with TBQ and won the 3 with Xiaoxi. And even though two of the ones that they played with TBQ were against EDG, TBQ had this really crucial misplay in Game 1 where he contested this invade, and he just died. There was another very similar invade by Snake, and Xiaoxi just backed away. Like, he had this understanding to leave. And I think that if it weren't for that, LGD were playing strongly enough that they probably could have even won the first game or made a very convincing attempt at it. So I don't like blaming a single player, but I think Xiaoxi overall improves their loss mitigation, and he's got a very good engage sense, which TBQ lacked, that I think can actually propel this team to be the best team in the world, or at least the best in China. So I'm really looking forward to them playing more with Xiaoxi if they decide to go through that route and don't break my heart, and then seeing them advance more and more. So I think LGD right now, some of the strategic elements they've shown, the really interesting lane swap scenario that they show with Snake where they said the bottom mid, after a while, after Godview got level 6 and Godview went top, Flame went bottom. This sort of really interesting understanding of the map and of matchups, of where they're putting each player, some of the way they move, the way they push the 1-3-1, the way they challenge the lane swaps in the early game. LGD is just really solid and overall strong strategic team, so having a good jungler on top of that, or at least a decent jungler on top of that, will could easily propel them to World's winning status. Gaming, they look like they're back to an extent. They also have some of that shakiness that they showed at some of their weakest points, and I think it's just because they haven't played as much with Koro 1 now that he's back yet. Interesting that Koro 1 and Pawn, and they immediately start playing with the roster when their new format is announced. I'm not saying that, you know, those players weren't injured, but I just want to point that out, that the first time we see the World's roster in a while is it with the coincides with the announcement of this new format. Edward Gaming looks really strong, like gangbusters, just like attacking, being very aggressive. They have this really strong team fighting they used to have. It's just they showed some weaknesses and some misunderstandings of pressure against IG that they hadn't before. Against LGD, they looked amazing. So I worry though that LGD, with their superior strategic understanding, can overtake them if they get that roster synergy and if they get this new coach down. But overall right now, ADG looks really, really powerful, so I'm excited to see them back. Worst team, WE is the second worst team. You can go to the previous videos for how I feel about that. King has shown some more interesting obsessions with Yasuo. They still can't seem to 2-0. WE has shown, we've shown seen even less of them, but they're still fixated on these all-out play comps and they're not really getting anywhere. Number 10 actually has changed, is Royal Never Give Up. Royal has fallen quite a little bit in my estimation. They still can't find this strategic element that they used to have when they were king. Excuse the quality of the video, the different location, the potential possible weird noises that the refrigerator makes. I'm not sure if you can hear those. If you can, I apologize in advance. And the cut on my face, I wanted to make this, but I'm traveling. Anyway, LPL Immersion, covering the rankings of the Chinese teams following the past 2 weeks of LPL and the Demacia Cup, so this is an extra week of time between. I figured it made more sense just to go off of the 2 weeks and keep the normal schedule. What I want to get into is immediately, bottom two teams haven't really changed. I still feel like King is the placing wards, understanding vision, working with Mata than Carry did, but he didn't really understand the champions as well, he didn't understand how to 2v1 as well, he didn't understand matchups as well, so this is something that I think is showing more and more as the game progresses, and as people start to figure out Vici's gimmick sort of roam top style a little bit better. I also think World 6 showing less proficiency on champions other than Gragas, so he has shown that he can play Echo, so that's a little bit of a saving grace. And it's just two champions off season, and they've gone to complete disaster. They seem uncoordinated. All they do is try to fight you. They're just the typical Chinese team of 2 years ago, if what people would think of as the typical Chinese team, whether or not they were actually that at that time. This is what RNG is now. And they're not nice to look at. They do, however, have some elements of vision which are good, and they're able to find carry performances or a little bit more coordination than WE or levels of play than WE or King, so that's why they're in 10th. Now we have number 9 is going to be surprisingly Vici Gaming. If you haven't heard me rant about Vici Gaming yet on China Talk or what have you, you are in for a treat. I think Vici Gaming is a complete disaster. I was kind of being tentative before about Dandy moving to top. I said maybe it's not such a terrible thing, you know, maybe Dandy has like a very, very high mechanical aptitude. He's not as good of a top laner as Carry. He's just not, and he's probably not going to be as good of a top laner as Carry until the end of the season. Dandy, I think, has better decision making, better understanding of the game, a better idea of invading the jungle,